Cat won't leave stranger's porch. When they let her in, they discover the heartbreaking reason. The rain fell in a steady rhythm, soaking the small suburban neighborhood in a blanket of gray. Most people had retreated indoors, warm and dry in the comfort of their homes. But on one porch, a lone figure huddled against the cold. A small, bedraggled cat. Her fur was matted from the rain, and her thin frame shivered with each gust of wind. She meowed softly, the sound barely audible over the patter of raindrops. Inside the house, Laura sat curled up on the couch, a steaming mug of tea in her hands. She was lost in the pages of her book when a faint noise caught her attention. It was a sound she almost didn't hear, but once she did, it wouldn't let her go. A soft, pitiful meow coming from outside. Laura set her mug down and moved to the window, brushing aside the curtain to peer into the gloom. At first, she saw nothing but the rain-soaked street. Then, her eyes caught a movement near the porch railing. Squinting, she realized it was a cat, curled up as tightly as possible, her tail wrapped around her fragile body. "Oh no," Laura whispered, her heart sinking. She was an animal lover, but she also knew the neighborhood wasn't safe for strays. Coyotes roamed the area at night, and the cold rain was enough to chill even the hardiest creature. She grabbed an umbrella and opened the door, stepping onto the porch. The cat flinched at her approach but didn't run. Her green eyes, large and frightened, stared up at Laura with a pleading intensity. "Hey there," Laura said softly, crouching down. "What are you doing out here, little one? You're going to freeze." The cat meowed again, louder this time as though begging for help. Laura hesitated for only a moment before reaching out. "Let's get you inside," she murmured. To her surprise, the cat didn't resist. She allowed Laura to scoop her up, her small body trembling in her arms. Once inside, Laura wrapped the cat in a towel and gently dried her off. "You're so skinny," she said, her voice laced with concern. "When was the last time you ate?" The cat blinked up at her, her expression almost resigned, as though she had long since stopped expecting kindness. Laura's heart ached. She set the cat down on a blanket near the heater and fetched a small bowl of milk from the kitchen. "This will help for now," she said, placing it in front of her guest. The cat sniffed the milk cautiously before lapping it up with fervor. Laura watched, her brow furrowed. Something about this cat felt different. She wasn't just a stray looking for a meal. There was a desperation in her eyes, a quiet sorrow that made Laura's chest tighten. As the evening wore on, the cat stayed close to the heater, her body relaxing little by little. Laura sat nearby, unsure of what to do next. She couldn't keep her, not with her full-time job and her small apartment. But the thought of putting her back out in the rain was unbearable. "Let's just get through tonight," Laura said, more to herself than the cat. "We'll figure out the rest tomorrow." That night, the cat slept soundly on the blanket, her tiny frame rising and falling with each steady breath. But Laura couldn't sleep. She lay awake, her mind racing with questions. Where had the cat come from? Why had she chosen Laura's porch? And why did she seem so heartbreakingly lost? The next morning, Laura decided to take the cat to the local animal shelter. She packed a small carrier with a blanket and gently coaxed the cat inside. "They'll take care of you," she said reassuringly. "Maybe someone's already looking for you." The shelter was a modest building on the edge of town, staffed by volunteers who worked tirelessly to care for the animals in their charge. Laura explained the situation to a woman at the front desk, who nodded sympathetically. "She's lucky you found her," the woman said, peering into the carrier. "A lot of cats don't survive nights like this." Laura felt a pang of guilt. "Do you think she has a family?" she asked. "She doesn't seem feral." The woman shrugged. "It's hard to say. We'll scan her for a microchip and see if we can find any information." As Laura waited, she couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. She told herself it was just the sadness of parting with the cat, but deep down, she knew it was more than that. Something about this felt unfinished. Minutes later, the shelter worker returned, her expression unusually serious. "We found a chip," she said, "but the information is complicated." "Complicated," Laura echoed, her stomach twisting. The worker hesitated before continuing. The cat is registered to a family that lived in this area, but they passed away about a year ago. The records show no one came forward to claim her. Laura's breath caught. She's been alone all this time? It looks that way, the woman said softly. She must have been surviving on scraps, or maybe someone else took her in temporarily. But cats have a strong sense of home. It's possible she came back to her family's house, not realizing they weren't there anymore. Laura felt tears prick her eyes. The thought of this little cat, wandering through the neighborhood in search of a home that no longer existed, was almost too much to bear. She looked at the carrier, where the cat sat quietly, her green eyes watching Laura with a strange mix of trust and sadness. "What happens to her now?" Laura asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The shelter worker gave her a kind but weary smile. "If no one claims her, she'll go up for adoption. But with her age and condition, it might be hard to find her a home." Laura's heart sank. She looked at the cat again, her decision already made. "I'll take her," she said firmly. "At least for now. She shouldn't have to be alone anymore." The shelter worker's expression softened. "That's wonderful. She's lucky to have found you." Laura brought the cat back home, her thoughts swirling with the weight of what she had learned. She set the carrier on the floor and opened it, letting the cat step out on her own terms. The cat padded out cautiously, her green eyes scanning the room before settling on the blanket near the heater. She curled up, her body relaxing as though she had already claimed the spot as her own. Laura sat on the couch, watching the cat with a mixture of sadness and curiosity. She couldn't shake the thought of the little animal wandering the neighborhood, searching for a family that was no longer there. The shelter worker's words echoed in her mind. "Cats have a strong sense of home." "What did you see in me?" Laura murmured, half to herself. "Why my porch?" The cat lifted her head, her gaze meeting Laura's. There was something almost knowing in her expression, a silent communication that made Laura's heart ache. She sighed and stood, heading to her desk to grab her laptop. If this cat had a story, Laura was determined to uncover it. She started with the microchip information which the shelter had provided. The cat's original owners, the Evans family, had lived just a few blocks away. A quick online search revealed an obituary for the family, a couple and their young daughter, Emily, who had tragically died in a car accident the previous year. Laura's chest tightened as she read the details, her eyes lingering on a photo of the smiling family. Emily held the cat in her arms, her small face alight with joy. "Oh," Laura whispered, her voice catching. "You were her cat." She glanced at the cat, who was now watching her intently, as if sensing the shift in Laura's mood. The pieces began to fall into place. The cat's refusal to leave the porch, her connection to the neighborhood, her quiet sorrow. She had been searching for Emily, her family, her home. Laura closed the laptop and leaned back in her chair, overwhelmed by the weight of the discovery. She felt a deep responsibility settle over her. This cat had lost everything, yet she had survived, clinging to some glimmer of hope. And now, by some twist of fate, she had found her way to Laura. Over the next few days, Laura began to notice the cat's behavior changing. She became more confident, exploring the apartment with cautious curiosity. Yet, every evening, she would sit by the window, her gaze fixed on something far beyond the glass. It was as though she were waiting for what Laura couldn't say. One night, as Laura was tidying up, she noticed the cat pawing at the front door. She let out a soft meow, her tail swishing anxiously. "What is it?" Laura asked, kneeling beside her. The cat looked up at her, then back at the door, her message clear. She wanted out. Laura hesitated. The thought of letting the cat roam in the dark, with all the dangers the neighborhood posed, was unthinkable. But the cat's insistence was undeniable. "Okay," Laura said reluctantly, "but I'm coming with you." She slipped on her coat and boots, grabbing a flashlight before opening the door. The cat stepped outside immediately, her movements purposeful despite the chilly night air. Laura followed, the beam of her flashlight illuminating the sidewalk as the cat led her down the street. They walked in silence, the cat's small form weaving through the shadows as though she knew exactly where she was going. Laura kept close, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. Finally, they reached a house at the end of the block. A modest, weathered home with darkened windows and an overgrown yard. Laura recognized it from the obituary photos. This had been the Evans family's home. The cat sat on the porch, her green eyes fixed on the door. Laura swallowed hard, her throat tightening. "This is where you came from, isn't it?" she whispered. The cat didn't move. She sat still and silent, her presence a quiet tribute to what had been lost. Laura stepped closer, her hand brushing against the faded paint of the doorframe. She felt a strange connection to this place, as though the cat's grief had reached out to her, binding them together. As she turned to leave, something caught her eye, a faint light flickering in the window. She froze, her breath catching. "Hello," she called, her voice trembling. There was no response. The light flickered again, then vanished, leaving the house in darkness. Laura's skin prickled with unease. She scooped up the cat, holding her close as she hurried back toward her apartment. The night seemed heavier now, the air thick with something she couldn't name. Back home, Laura set the cat down and locked the door behind her. She sat on the couch, her thoughts racing. The house had been empty for months. She was sure of it. So what had she seen? And why did the cat seem so determined to return there? The cat jumped onto the couch beside her, curling up in her lap. Laura stroked her fur absently, her mind grappling with the questions that refused to leave her. She didn't believe in ghosts, but the connection between the cat, the house, and its lost family felt undeniable. "I'll figure it out," she promised, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. "Whatever it is, we'll figure it out." As the cat purred softly in her lap, Laura felt a strange sense of comfort. The road ahead was uncertain, but for now, they had each other, and that was enough. The following morning, Laura woke to find the cat sitting by the window, her gaze fixed on the street. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting stripes across her dark fur. There was something almost wistful about her posture, as if she were waiting for something or someone that would never come. "Still thinking about that house, huh?" Laura murmured as she poured herself a cup of coffee. The cat turned her head slightly, her green eyes meeting Laura's with a quiet intensity. The events of the previous night lingered in Laura's mind. The light in the window, the strange pull of the Evans house. It all felt surreal, like the beginning of a story she couldn't quite grasp. She couldn't ignore it, though. Something about the cat's connection to that house demanded attention. After a quick breakfast, Laura decided to do some digging. She started with the local library's online archives, searching for any records related to the Evans family. What she found only deepened the mystery. The Evanses had lived in the neighborhood for nearly a decade, described by neighbors as a kind and loving family. Emily, the young daughter, had been particularly close to their cat, whom she had named Luna. Laura paused, her heart skipping a beat. Luna. The name fit the cat perfectly, a quiet, almost ethereal presence. But what caught Laura's attention most was the date of the car accident. It had happened almost exactly a year ago, and though the obituary had mentioned the family's passing, it didn't explain why the house had been left abandoned. Neighbors had reported seeing occasional lights in the windows, but no one seemed to know who might be responsible. Laura sat back in her chair, her thoughts spinning. If no one had lived in the house since the accident, what had caused the light she'd seen last night? And why had Luna, after a year of wandering, suddenly returned to her family's porch? Feeling a surge of determination, Laura grabbed her coat and headed back to the Evans house, Luna trotting close behind her. The cat's energy seemed different today, more focused, as though she knew Laura was finally taking the steps she needed to. The house looked just as it had the night before, quiet, weathered, and shrouded in an air of melancholy. Luna immediately jumped onto the porch, settling in the same spot as before. Laura hesitated for a moment before stepping up to the door. She knocked softly, half expecting no answer. But then she heard it, a faint sound from inside, a creak, like the shift of old wood, followed by what sounded like the distant hum of a child's voice. Laura froze, her heart racing. "Hello," she called, her voice trembling. "Is someone there?" There was no response. Swallowing her fear, Laura tried the doorknob. It turned easily, the door creaking open to reveal the dim interior of the house. The air inside was cool and still, carrying the faint scent of dust and something sweeter, like flowers left too long in a vase. Luna slipped past her, padding confidently into the house. Laura followed, her footsteps echoing softly on the hardwood floor. The living room was sparse, its furniture covered in sheets. A child's drawings were still pinned to the walls, their colors faded but intact. One of them depicted a smiling cat with large green eyes, labeled Luna, in shaky, childish handwriting. "This was your home," Laura whispered, her voice catching. Luna looked back at her, meowing softly before continuing toward the hallway. Laura followed, the unease in her chest growing with each step. At the end of the hallway was a door, slightly ajar. Luna stopped in front of it, her tail swishing as she looked back at Laura expectantly. Laura hesitated, her hand hovering over the doorknob. The faint hum she'd heard earlier was clearer now, like a melody, soft and haunting. She pushed the door open. The room beyond was a child's bedroom, untouched by time. A small bed sat beneath the window, its covers neatly arranged. Toys were scattered across the floor, and on the nightstand was a photo of Emily holding Luna, both of them beaming with happiness. But it wasn't the room that held Laura's attention. It was the light. A soft, golden glow filled the space, emanating from nowhere and everywhere all at once. In the center of the room stood a figure, a translucent outline of a young girl. Emily. Laura's breath caught, her pulse hammering in her ears. Emily's figure turned slowly, her features faint but unmistakable. She smiled, her gaze falling on Luna, who had hopped onto the bed and was purring softly. "Luna," the figure said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "You found her." Laura's knees felt weak, but she forced herself to speak. "Emily," she asked, her voice shaking, "is it really you?" The figure turned toward her, the smile fading slightly. "You brought her home," Emily said. "Thank you." Tears filled Laura's eyes. I didn't know this was your home. She found me. She wouldn't leave." Emily nodded, her form flickering slightly. "She waited for me," she said softly, "but I couldn't come back. Not like before." The sadness in her voice was palpable, and Laura felt her chest tighten. "What can I do?" she asked. "How can I help?" Emily knelt beside Luna, her hand passing through the cat's fur as if stroking her. "She doesn't belong here anymore," Emily said. "She needs someone to love her now." Laura swallowed hard, her tears spilling over. "I'll take care of her. Promise." Emily smiled again, the glow around her intensifying. "Then she's where she's meant to be." The light grew brighter, filling the room with warmth before fading completely. The figure was gone, leaving the room dim and silent once more. Luna purred softly, her green eyes meeting Laura's with a calm that seemed almost otherworldly. Laura sat on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling. She didn't know how long she stayed there, but when she finally stood, she felt a strange sense of peace. She picked up Luna and carried her out of the house, locking the door behind her. As they walked back home, Laura whispered to Luna, "You're with me now, and I'll make sure you never have to wait alone again." The cat nuzzled against her, purring louder, and for the first time since their paths had crossed, Laura felt like they had both found exactly where they were meant to be. Over the following weeks, Luna settled into her new life with an ease that felt almost fated. She no longer lingered by the door or stared out the window. Her days instead spent following Laura around the apartment, curling up on her lap, or napping in the patch of sunlight that fell across the living room floor. There was a calmness about her now, as though the weight of her past had finally been lifted. For Laura, Luna's presence became a source of quiet joy. She had never planned on having a pet, but Luna's arrival had filled a void she hadn't realized existed. The apartment, once just a place to return to after work, now felt like a home. Luna was always there to greet her, her soft purrs a balm for even the most stressful days. One evening, as Laura sat on the couch with Luna sprawled across her lap, her thoughts drifted to the Evans family. The memory of Emily's glowing figure in the house was as vivid as if it had happened yesterday. Laura still struggled to fully comprehend what she had seen, but she didn't need to. The experience had left her with a profound sense of connection, both to the family who had loved Luna and to the cat who had carried their love forward. She glanced at the small picture frame on the shelf above the TV. Inside it was the drawing she had taken from the Evans house. Emily's childlike depiction of Luna, her name scrawled in colorful letters. It felt right to keep it there, a quiet tribute to the little girl who had loved Luna so deeply. As the weeks turned into months, Luna's presence began to ripple outward. Laura found herself opening up more to the world around her. She started volunteering at the local animal shelter, inspired by her bond with Luna to help other animals in need. On weekends, she took Luna to the park, where the cat became something of a local celebrity, her story captivating everyone who met her. But it was more than just Luna's story that touched people. It was the bond between them. Neighbors, co-workers, even strangers at the shelter would comment on the way Luna followed Laura with her eyes, as though she understood every word spoken. "She's not just a cat," one neighbor said with a smile. "She's family." One chilly autumn afternoon, Laura decided to take Luna back to the Evans house one last time. She wanted to see the place again, not out of curiosity, but out of a sense of closure. She carried Luna in her arms as they walked down the familiar street, the crisp air filled with the scent of falling leaves. When they arrived, the house looked the same as it always had, quiet, weathered, but somehow peaceful. Laura sat on the porch steps, holding Luna close. "This was your first home," she said softly. "And now you have another." Luna purred, her green eyes calm as they gazed at the house. Laura felt a strange sense of completion wash over her. She didn't need to go inside, didn't need to see anything more. She had found her answers, not just about Luna's past, but about her own capacity for love and connection. As they turned to leave, a faint glow flickered in the window. Laura stopped, her breath catching. It was the same soft, golden light she had seen that night in Emily's room. It lasted only a moment before fading, leaving the house in shadow once more. Laura smiled, her eyes brimming with tears. "Goodbye, Emily," she whispered. "Thank you for trusting me." She carried Luna back home, the autumn leaves crunching softly beneath her boots. That night, as they curled up together on the couch, Laura felt an overwhelming sense of peace. Luna's journey had led her to Laura, and in doing so, had brought both of them exactly where they were meant to be. In the quiet of the evening, with the soft hum of life around her, Laura finally understood. Sometimes, love doesn't end. It just finds a new place to grow. And in that moment, she knew she and Luna would carry that love forward, together, for as long as they had each other. As the seasons changed, Laura and Luna's bond deepened, weaving them into a quiet rhythm that felt as natural as breathing. Luna's resilience inspired Laura daily. Her ability to endure loss, find her way to safety, and trust again spoke volumes about the strength of her little heart. And while Luna seemed to, having settled fully into her new life, Laura couldn't help but notice that her presence had changed something fundamental in her own. Laura began to see the world differently. Small moments of kindness, an elderly neighbor feeding the birds, a child sharing a toy, a stranger holding a door, seemed to shine brighter. She started finding joy in simplicity. The way Luna's purring could lull her into relaxation after a tough day, or how the first sip of her morning coffee felt like the start of endless possibilities. Luna's unwavering trust reminded Laura that love was worth fighting for, no matter how fragile it might seem. One particularly snowy evening, Laura sat by the window, watching the flakes drift lazily under the glow of the streetlights. Luna sat perched on the windowsill, her eyes following the snowflakes with quiet fascination. The apartment was warm, the heater humming softly in the background, and Laura had an old jazz record playing on the turntable. "You've really changed things around here, haven't you?" Laura said, smiling at Luna. The cat turned her head, giving Laura one of her unreadable but deeply affectionate looks. It was as if she understood completely. Laura's phone buzzed on the coffee table, interrupting the quiet. She picked it up and saw a message from the local animal shelter. "Hi Laura, we just wanted to let you know we have a special case and thought you might be interested. A shy tabby cat, abandoned like Luna, but struggling to adjust. Could you come by and meet her?" Laura stared at the message for a long moment. The idea of opening her home to another animal stirred something in her. Not fear, but a cautious hope. She glanced at Luna, who had stretched out luxuriously on the windowsill, completely at ease. "What do you think, girl? Do we have room for one more?" The next day, Laura visited the shelter. The tabby was small and skittish, her fur a patchwork of gray and brown. She cowered in the corner of her enclosure, her wide eyes darting nervously at every movement. Laura knelt down and spoke softly, just as she had with Luna. "Hey there, sweet girl. It's okay. You're safe now." To Laura's surprise, the tabby didn't retreat further. Instead, she hesitated, then inched closer, her whiskers twitching as she sniffed the air. It was a small step, but it was enough. Laura knew then that she would take the tabby home. Introducing the new cat, whom Laura named Maple, wasn't without its challenges. At first, Luna seemed unimpressed by the intrusion, watching Maple's cautious exploration with what Laura swore was a raised eyebrow. But over time, Luna's calm and steady presence began to soothe Maple's fears. The two cats grew to tolerate, then enjoy, each other's company, curling up together in a patch of sunlight or chasing a feather toy across the floor. Watching their bond form was a revelation for Laura. She realized that Luna's arrival hadn't just been about finding a home for a lost cat. It had been about building a life together. Luna had opened Laura's heart in ways she hadn't thought possible. And now that love was expanding again, encompassing Maple and all the small, beautiful moments that made their days whole. One evening, as Laura sat on the couch with both cats nestled beside her, she picked up the photo of Emily and Luna from the shelf. She traced her finger over the smiling faces, her heart full. "You started all of this," she whispered. "Thank you." Luna stirred, lifting her head to nuzzle Laura's hand. It felt like an acknowledgement, a quiet affirmation that Emily's love had carried forward, finding a new home, a new family, and a new beginning. And as Laura leaned back, listening to the soft sounds of the apartment, Luna's purring, Maple's contented sighs, the faint rustle of the wind outside, she realized that this was more than just a home. It was a sanctuary, a place where love, even after heartbreak, could grow again. In that moment, Laura knew her life had been forever changed, not just by Luna, but by the enduring connection they shared. A bond that had turned loss into hope, and hope into something truly extraordinary. The calm Laura had grown accustomed to in her life with Luna and Maple was shattered one winter night. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows as a snowstorm blanketed the neighborhood in an eerie silence. Laura was curled up with a book on the couch, Luna stretched across her lap, and Maple nestled by her feet. The heater hummed softly, the only sound in the apartment besides the storm outside. Then came the noise. A sharp, insistent knock at the door broke through the stillness, startling both cats and sending Laura's heart racing. She wasn't expecting anyone, and visitors were rare, especially during a storm like this. Maple darted under the couch, her green eyes wide with fear, while Luna leapt to the floor, her tail twitching as she stared at the door. Laura set her book aside and stood, her mind racing with possibilities. She approached the door cautiously, peeking through the peephole. A figure stood on the porch, their face obscured by a hood, snow swirling around them. "Who is it?" Laura called, her voice steady despite the unease curling in her chest. The figure didn't answer. Instead, they knocked again, louder this time. Laura hesitated, her hand hovering over the lock. Something about this felt wrong, but the storm was brutal, and she couldn't ignore the possibility that someone might need help. She opened the door a crack, the icy wind biting at her face. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone firm. The figure looked up, their hood falling back slightly to reveal a middle-aged man with weathered features. His eyes were sharp and piercing, and his clothes were soaked through from the storm. "You've got my cat," he said, his voice gruff. Laura froze. "I'm sorry, what?" "The black one," the man said, his gaze drifting past her and into the apartment. Her name's Luna. She's mine. Laura's heart pounded. That can't be right, she said, gripping the door tightly. Luna belonged to a family that passed away. The man's expression hardened. I know, he said. They were my family. The revelation hit Laura like a punch to the stomach. She stared at the man, trying to reconcile his words with everything she knew about Luna's past. You're saying you're related to the Evanses? They were my brother and his family, he said, his voice tight. When they died, I didn't have the means to take her, but she's mine, and I want her back. Luna appeared at Laura's feet, her green eyes fixed on the man. She let out a low, wary meow, her tail swishing with unease. The man crouched slightly, extending a hand toward her. Luna, he said softly, come here, girl. But Luna didn't move. She stayed close to Laura, her body tense, her ears pinned back. The man's face darkened, and he straightened abruptly. She knows me, he insisted. She's just scared. She's been through a lot. Laura's mind raced. The man's claim made sense, but something about his demeanor set her on edge. He seemed more desperate than compassionate, his tone sharp rather than tender. If you're really her owner, she said carefully, why didn't you take her in sooner? She's been wandering the neighborhood for a year. The man's jaw tightened. I told you, I didn't have the means, but I do now. I'm sorry, Laura said, her voice firm, but Luna's been through enough. She's happy here. The man's eyes narrowed. You don't have a right to keep her, he snapped. She's my family's cat. That makes her mine. Luna let out a sharp hiss, her fur bristling as she backed away from the door. Maple peeked out from under the couch, her frightened eyes darting between Laura and the man. Laura stepped in front of Luna, her protective instincts flaring. If she's really yours, you can prove it. Show me some kind of documentation. The man's expression faltered for a moment before he scowled. I don't need to prove anything, he said. You've had her long enough. Hand her over. No, Laura said, her voice steady despite the fear twisting in her gut. Luna stays with me. If you have a legal claim, you can take it up with the authorities. The man's face flushed with anger, and for a moment, Laura thought he might force his way inside. But then he stepped back, his breath visible in the cold night air. This isn't over, he said, his voice low and threatening. I'll be back. He turned and disappeared into the storm, leaving Laura shaken and breathless. She closed the door quickly, locking it and leaning against it as she tried to calm her racing heart. Luna pressed against her leg, her body still trembling. Laura scooped her up, holding her close as she whispered, It's okay, girl. I won't let him take you. But as the storm raged outside, Laura couldn't ignore the man's parting words. This isn't over. The next morning, Laura barely slept. The man's threat echoed in her mind, and every creak of the apartment felt like a harbinger of his return. Luna and Maple stayed close to her, sensing her unease. Luna in particular seemed more alert, her ears twitching at every sound from outside, her usual calm replaced by a quiet vigilance. Laura knew she couldn't ignore the situation. If the man truly had a claim to Luna, he would likely pursue it, and if his intentions were less than honorable, she needed to be prepared. After feeding the cats, she grabbed her phone and called the local shelter. The same volunteer who had helped her initially answered. Hi, this is Laura, she began. I adopted a cat named Luna a few weeks ago. I need some help verifying her history. The volunteer was sympathetic. Of course, let me pull up her file. After a pause, she added, Luna was microchipped, right? That's how we traced her back to the Evans family. Exactly, Laura said. But someone showed up last night claiming to be part of that family. He said he's her rightful owner. The volunteer's tone sharpened. Did he have any proof? No, and that's the problem, Laura said. He seemed off. I don't trust him, but I want to be sure. I'll double-check our records, the volunteer said. Hang tight. While waiting, Laura decided to take action on her own. She contacted the local police to report the man's visit and his vague threat. The officer on the phone was understanding but cautious. If he comes back, Don't engage with him. Call us immediately, she advised. By the time the shelter called back, Laura's nerves were frayed. I looked into Luna's record again, the volunteer said. Her microchip information was registered to the Evans family, parents and their daughter, Emily. No other relatives were listed. Could he be lying about being related to them? Laura asked. It's possible, the volunteer said. If he's determined to take her, you may want to consult with an attorney. As of now, Luna's legally yours since you adopted her. The reassurance eased some of Laura's tension, but questions still lingered. Who was this man, and why did he want Luna so badly? Something about his desperation didn't sit right with her. That afternoon, as the snowstorm cleared, Laura decided to dig deeper. She returned to the Evans house, hoping to find clues about the man's connection to the family. Luna seemed reluctant to leave her carrier this time, but Laura brought her along, thinking her presence might provide some insight. The house was just as quiet as before, its weathered facade seeming to hold its breath. Laura hesitated at the door, her hand trembling slightly as she pushed it open. Inside, the air felt colder, heavier, as though the house itself remembered the man's intrusion the night before. Luna leapt out of her carrier and padded toward Emily's room with purpose. Laura followed, her footsteps soft on the creaking floorboards. When she reached the bedroom, she froze. The photograph of Emily and Luna, which had sat undisturbed on the nightstand, was gone. Laura's stomach dropped. She glanced around the room, searching for any other changes. The drawings were still pinned to the walls, the bed untouched. But the absence of the photo filled her with dread. Had the man taken it? And if so, why? A sound behind her made her whirl around. Luna stood by the door, her fur bristling as she let out a low growl. Laura's breath caught as a shadow shifted in the hallway. Looking for this? The man's voice was sharp, cutting through the silence like a blade. He stepped into the room, holding the photograph in his hand. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes burned with intensity. "What are you doing here?" Laura demanded, her voice trembling. The man smirked. "I told you this wasn't over." Laura stepped back, her heart pounding. "If you're really part of the Evans family, prove it. Show me something, anything that ties you to them." The man's smirk faltered, and for a moment, his mask slipped. "I don't have to prove anything," he snapped. "That cat belongs to me." "No, she doesn't," Laura said, her voice rising with anger. "You've done nothing but lie and threaten me. If you cared about Luna, you wouldn't have left her alone for a year." The man's face twisted with fury. He took a step closer, but before he could speak, Luna leapt onto the bed, positioning herself between Laura and the man. She hissed, her tail puffed out, her green eyes blazing. "See," the man said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "She remembers me." "No," Laura said, her voice steady now. "She's protecting me." The man froze, his confidence faltering. He looked at Luna, then back at Laura, something shifting in his expression. It wasn't anger anymore. It was something darker. Regret? Shame? "You don't understand," he muttered. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." "Then explain," Laura said. "Tell me the truth." The man sank onto the edge of the bed, his shoulders slumping. "After my brother and his family died, I lost everything. I was angry, lost. I thought taking Luna would help me hold on to them somehow, but I couldn't even take care of myself, let alone her. So I left her here. I thought she'd move on." Laura's chest tightened. "She didn't," she said softly. "She waited. And when she found me, she trusted me to take care of her." The man looked at Luna, his eyes glistening. "She's all I have left of them." Laura hesitated, her anger softening into something more complicated. "She's not a memory to cling to," she said. "She's a living being. She deserves love and stability, not to be passed around as a token of grief." The man nodded slowly, his gaze dropping to his hands. "You're right," he said, his voice barely audible. I didn't know what else to do." "You can let her go," Laura said gently. "You can honor their memory by letting her have the life she deserves." The man was silent for a long moment before he stood. He placed the photograph on the bed and stepped back. "Take care of her," he said. "Please." "I will," Laura said, her voice steady. "I promise." The man gave a small nod and turned, disappearing down the hallway. When the door closed behind him, the tension in the room finally broke. Luna jumped into Laura's arms, nuzzling her neck as though reassuring her. "You're safe now," Laura whispered, tears spilling over. "You're home." As they left the house, the weight of the encounter began to lift. Luna had chosen Laura, and now there was no question about where she belonged. Together, they walked back into the light, ready to face whatever came next, together as family.